The US Cyber Command just ordered a full stand down on all operations against Russia. That means no offensive cyber operations, no active digital warfare, nothing. And this isn't just speculation. This is a straight order from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. So what the hell does this mean for US cybersecurity? I'm seeing peers of mine in the industry basically panic that if we're stopping tracking the Russian threats, that we're going to have a hard time making back up this ground. What does this mean for the situation in Ukraine? So in this video, I'm going to break down what happened, what was in the order, why it mattered, and what this means for global cybersecurity. Let's get into it. If you're new here, I'm Matt Johansson. I've been in cybersecurity for over 15 years, protecting startups to the world's largest banks. And I want to give you a cybersecurity industry insider's perspective on all of this that's going on. So let's dig into what actually happened. This is the article that started it all. This is by The Record, and it says, exclusive, Hegseth orders Cyber Command to stand down on Russia planning. Getting this order from a group of sources that wanted to stay anonymous because of course they did. Hegseth gave this orders to a series of generals, including Timothy Haw and Ryan Heritage. These sources specifically call out that this order does not impact the NSA, just Cyber Command. So basically, we're not stopping the whole signal intelligence work on Russia, collecting what Russia is doing against us. We don't know the full details of the order yet, but you can't ignore that it's happening at the same time as everything going on with Zelensky in the White House and Trump trying to negotiate this peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. One of the things worrying a lot of people is that we don't really have a timeline for this order. It's kind of a foreseeable future stand down. And Cyber Command has apparently begun a risk assessment, trying to develop a report that says, hey, if we stand down, here's what we think might happen. So what we're trying to figure out is which personnel in Cyber Command this actually applies to. According to this article, if it applies to digital warriors, first of all, badass job title. If it applies to digital warriors focused on Russia, then we're talking hundreds of people. But as it says, if the guidance extends to areas like intelligence or analysis capabilities, we could be talking an extra few thousand people. All right, that's the order from Hegseth. I wanted to look into this of, well, what is specifically being told to stand down? If it's not the NSA, it's just Cyber Command, well, what's Cyber Command? I think a lot of people reading these headlines are jumping to, oh, this means we are doing nothing in cybersecurity against Russia anymore. I saw jokes that said, hey, why don't we just give them VPN tunnels? So I went digging through a little bit of the history of Cyber Command to really understand where we're at with it, what it's doing. It seems like a lot of it was created under Obama, but then escalated under Trump's first term. Here you can see some announcements from 2019 from the DoD, basically talking about increasing cyber offensive capabilities and to use this force to take a more aggressive stance in the cyber world. This article from 2019 goes and directly names Russia and China and how that they are asserting their power throughout the globe. It goes on to talk about the differences between the US physical military presence and then evolving into a cyber military presence, saying things like, while we're having success deterring conventional aggression against the United States, our adversaries are increasingly resorting to malign activity in less traditional areas to undermine our security. There is perhaps no area where this is more true than in the cyber domain. I really found this part interesting too. Cyber has been part and parcel of what many call hybrid war, a blurring the lines between peacetime and wartime. For nation states such as China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, engaging America and our allies below the threshold of armed conflict is a logical choice. So Cyber Command was really brought up to be part of this whole persistent engagement strategy. They're framing cyberspace as a domain for constant contact with the adversary. And a lot of what happened in the first Trump administration was elevating Cyber Command from a part of the NSA to its own branch of the DoD. Here, this article says the elevation of Cyber Command to its own thing in the DoD actually is positioning it to fight better for resources within the department, making cybersecurity more competitive for resources against other things like nuclear deterrent or defending against WMDs. This goes all the way back to 2017 when Trump actually approved this independence of Cyber Command. And then this continued to escalate. Cyber Command got more and more authority to act on its own. So it went from like single digit operations in a decade to dozens of operations in the last few months when this article came out and back in 2019. So obviously, since that Record article came out, some of the bigger media operations have begun picking this story up. And as we went through the last few days, the narrative is clarifying on US halting offensive cyber operations. So right here in the beginning of the Washington Post article, it says this pause is only meant to last as long as negotiations continue. This is new information from the Record, which said the timeline was completely unsure. So I think the thing to agree or disagree with here is Trump's whole stance on Russia. I want to say that the cyber operations part of this makes sense if we're in peace talks, which is a really weird thing for me to say as the cybersecurity guy. But As this says here, it's not unusual to stop offensive operations in the time of some sort of strategic conversation. So do I or do you agree or disagree with Trump's entire stance on Russia in general? One issue. But conflating that with standing down all cyber operations against Russia, putting us at a giant risk, I think is a completely different thing that we need to talk about today. So I think it's obvious that Russia is still one of the biggest cyber threats against the United States, and really the whole world. They are one of the absolute centers of gravity for all ransomware operations. They have incredibly talented and well-funded government-backed operations that act against all sorts of governments and private corporations across the globe. I mean, literally just a few months ago, we were covering the story where Midnight Blizzard, which is one of the threat actor groups tracked out of Russia, compromised Microsoft and a whole bunch of government employees through a highly targeted spear phishing attack. Hell, I feel like I'm reporting about threat actors out of Russia every week. Here, switching over to another mass media article. This is the New York Times saying that Senator Chuck Schumer said, "We're giving Mr. Putin a free pass as Russia continues to launch cyber operations and ransomware attacks against critical American infrastructure." So it's one thing to have a strategy of ceasing offensive operations during peace talk. It's another thing to completely ignore Russia as a threat. And it seems like that's what we're starting to do, or at least trying to not piss them off by naming them as a threat. So literally at the United Nations last week, a State Department official gave an entire talk about foreign adversaries targeting US critical infrastructure, specifically talking about China attacks, addressing China and their group's Salt Typhoon, but completely omitted Russia from this entire speech. They even said many diplomats noticed that we are pulling punches from Russia in UN cyber discussions. All right, that's all the official news. There's one more piece of this story that I need to talk about, but it gets a little murkier. And that has to do with this Guardian article that talks about how a verbal-only memo to CISA basically telling CISA to stand down everything against Russia. This is not just offensive work. This is all research, analysis, anything. The narrative on this whole report is that they're saying the Trump administration does not consider Russia a cyber threat, and that this shift in policy could make us more vulnerable to hacks from Russia. They also talk about that speech at the UN where we leave Russia out, which is a little bit ridiculous. But again, if we're in peace talks, maybe I get that we're trying not to piss anybody off. But the crux of this whole story is this memo that they're talking about, that they have sources talking about it in CISA. So I'm going to read this directly. A recent memo to CISA set out new priorities for the agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security and monitors cyber threats against U.S. critical infrastructure. The new directive set out priorities that included China and protecting local systems, but did not mention Russia. Their source on this said that if you were doing anything Russia-related at CISA, that project was nixed. Russia and China are our biggest adversaries. With all the cuts being made to different agencies, a lot of cybersecurity personnel have been fired. Our systems are not going to be protected, and our adversaries know this, that person said. But here's where this gets sticky. CISA is completely denying that this memo existed, and they announced this via Twitter. CISA's mission is to defend against all cyber threats to U.S. critical infrastructure, including from Russia. There has been no change in our posture. Any reporting to the contrary is fake and undermines our national security. I tried to find some actual stuff on CISA's website about this, not just their Twitter account, because this feels a little unofficial to me. Also, the word fake always stands out to me now since the whole fake news narrative. So this just overall smelt a little weird to me. So I went over to the CISA website, went to their news section, and they haven't posted anything since the new administration has taken office. Their last post is January 21st. You could see they were posting regularly right up until that point. This might be because the person running this got laid off. I have no idea, but it was pretty telling to me that I could not find anything about this on their website. I even went to the old CISA director, Jen Easterly's Twitter page to see if I could see her talking about anything. And this page is completely archived. She stepped down as the director voluntarily when Trump got elected, and she made her last day January 20th or 19th, right before the new administration took office. So this account is archived. I have no idea what Jen's thoughts on anything going on is right now. The other thing that stood out to me is kind of weird is CISA retweeted this post from Tricia McLaughlin, who is the Assistant Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. And this is a very politically charged post saying, hey, this is garbage. The memo referenced in the Guardian's quote-unquote reporting is not from the Trump administration, which is quite inconvenient to their narrative. CISA remains committed to addressing all cyber threats to the U.S. critical infrastructure, including from Russia. There's been no change to this posture. So this is where this gets murky. And this is why a lot of the reporting said that that was a verbal-only memo. All right, so what we actually know is this order from Hegseth to stand down offensive operations. There's a rumor about CISA projects involving Russia being nixed. But CISA is laying off people left and right, so I think things are shaking up over there all around. Maybe that's why projects are getting nixed. We're not clear about the whole CISA thing. So let's work off of what we actually know and what the risks of that are. The top risk on my brain is that this doesn't mean Russia stops what Russia's doing. So if we're signaling a slowdown in Russia cyber operations, does Russia see this as an opportunity to up the ante against US government and also US private companies? Russia is no stranger to combining state-sponsored activities with cybercrime. So what I'm going to keep my eye on in the next couple of weeks or months is, do we see a dramatic increase in cybercrime activity that all the politicians involved in this in both US and Russia can point to and say, well, that's not us, that's cybercrime. But groups like Conti, Revil, Lockbit ransomware group are all in Russia, backed by Russia, protected by Russia, funded by Russia. So if we see an increase in ransomware activity or election interference, espionage, US critical infrastructure attack, disinformation campaigns, I'm going to call this whole thing a mistake, because obviously they saw that as an opportunity to pour gas on the fire. The other major area that this is a risk, and this is probably the whole point of everything that's going on based on what we saw with Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office last week, is the US played a major role in Ukraine's cyber defense against Russia. Cyber Command, which just got told to stand down, the whole point of everything we're talking about, was the ones who were running counter operations against Russia in retaliation for whatever they were doing in Ukraine. So if those operations are truly halting, I'm worried about what that means for Ukraine in terms of digital attacks coming from Russia. And then the third group I'm worried about is US private companies. I showed you the recent attack by the Russian government on Microsoft. And Microsoft, in my opinion, has one of the best cybersecurity teams on the planet. If we take a whole different stance on this whole persistent engagement strategy that was meant to deter cyber operations in fear of counterattacks, what does that mean for energy sector companies, healthcare companies, financial companies who don't have the cybersecurity teams that Microsoft has? All right, what happens next with all of this? So as I mentioned in that one report, Cyber Command is currently doing a risk report. They're going to assess what risks increase if they stand down this whole operation. We're not going to get a look at that unless that also leaks. But I think this really has major implications in what's next for US's involvement in NATO. So what I'm going to be watching in all of this is, do we see an increase in ransomware activities or cybercrime activities? Does this stand down order last for longer than the negotiations last? And I want confirmation of what's actually going on in CISA. I think this decision is going to reshape the whole cyber war landscape over the next couple of years. And we're going to look back at this and figure out, was this actually a strategic pause in operations or a complete miscalculation? I'll be honest, my first reaction to this when I saw this news was, oh, we're cooked. Russia and Trump are in cahoots, and the White House is doing anything they can to appease Moscow. But as I read into it, I think the headlines are overblowing it just a little bit, as it seems like, hey, we're actually trying to do some negotiations, and it makes sense that we would stand down all offensive operations. I at least hope that's the case. What do you think? Does this move make sense? Or is this putting the US at a giant cybersecurity risk? Let me know in the comments below. This is a wild story. The reporting is all over the place on it. If you found this analysis useful, please hit that like and subscribe button, do the bell, do all the YouTube stuff, share with your mom. I'm going to follow this story closely. I'll give you more updates as I see them. Also, check out any write-ups I do on this stuff on vulnu.com for my free weekly newsletter and other news reports that I put out. Thank you so much. Catch you next time.